With inflation hitting its lowest levels in over 4 years, many are starting to understand that something very, very big is happening behind the scenes. As Bitcoin has just touched on its 50-week SMA for the first time since September of 2024, before the largest Bitcoin pump of the cycle thus far, are the Moon Boys doomed? Or are the Moon Boys preparing for the biggest bull explosion yet, unlike anything we've ever seen? So if you understand that before things get big, they have to start off small, hit that like and subscribe, get signed up with FEMX or BITUNIX below if you want to buy Bitcoin, altcoins, or trade. And without any further ado, we see the price of Bitcoin sitting right around 80,000 US dollars per coin. And in fact, we see the fear and greed index on the weekly chart is right now at about a 19 or 20. Again, even below the levels that we saw back in October of 2022, the bear market bottom. So this market is extremely fearful still, absolutely. But what about the bigger picture? What do we actually see happening? So we can take a look here. Global liquidity is rising fast with about a 75-day lag. In green right here, you see the global liquidity has been rising for a fair amount of time. In orange, you see the price of Bitcoin. And you can either just pause the video right here or just look at it for a couple of moments. You can see that this has led, with a 75-day lag, the price of Bitcoin and a lot of other risk assets, right? Global liquidity is increasing. If you understand global liquidity, it is quite literally telling us that the Bitcoin and these other risk assets are going to go up, but there is a lag. So that's big. But what else do we see happening here? We also see that despite yesterday's statement from senators reintroducing Bill 4912 or the Bitcoin Act and positive macro data, the Bitcoin Fear and Greed Index remains at extremely low levels comparable to the bottom of the previous cycle, as I just said. The market is extremely scared. Didn't Warren Buffett say something about fear? Be fearful when others are greedy and be greedy when others are fearful. Hey, I'm telling you this now. In a couple of weeks, I guess we'll have more data and more information, and we'll be able to look back on this and think, and we'll be able to say either we should have been even more scared, or in fact, the fear was telling us we should have been buying. We also see US inflation is dropping hard. Trump is delivering exactly what he promised. Trump has quite, by the way, whether or not you agree with this, which there are a lot of people that do agree with it and a lot of people that don't, he's quite literally been telling us everything that he's going to be doing, whether it was freeing Ross Ulbricht, whether it was introducing Bitcoin legislation and all this. So far, literally everything that he told us he was going to do, he's been doing. And for the first couple days of his presidency, people were getting so upset saying, see, he didn't free Ross. See, he's going to completely ignore Bitcoin, all this stuff. Those people are wrong, and they're actually really upset about it, but they're pretending now that they just move the goalpost infinitely, right? There's never going to be a goalpost that they stop moving. But next up is rate cuts. Once we see this inflation coming down, which we are seeing, it'll make stocks, Bitcoin, and crypto explode. Give it a little time. Okay, patience is not something some of these people have, but you need to have a little bit, especially when we're doing something very delicate. US inflation is down to 2.8% lower than predicted as of the information we got this morning. You know what happens next. CPI inflation falls to 2.8%, which is below the 2.9 expectation. Core CPI inflation falls to 3.1%, below about 3.2%. It marks the first decline in both headline and core CPI in about almost a year. Inflation is cooling down in the US. You guys know what happens next. This CPI report shows inflation is declining and the economy is moving in the right direction. Core consumer prices, which is the best measure of inflation, dropped to its lowest level in 4 years. Much like last week's job report, it's far better than the media predicted and the so-called quote-unquote experts. So it's happening. Just give it some time. We see what's happening. They're telling us what's going to happen, and it's coming. It's literally all been true so far. Gas prices are also coming down. Egg prices are also coming down. Okay, give it some time. CNN even saying, right? CNN it does not want to report this, but it's better than expected in the inflation report and reversing 4 straight months of rising inflation under the last administration. So we also have massive liquidity around the $79.5 to $81,000 zone for Bitcoin. Keep an eye on this. And we as well see that Bitcoin is bouncing after filling the November 2024 CME gap. One more major gap close by, sitting between here and about $87,000 per Bitcoin. Will that fill as well? Okay, so we're seeing again, if we look at the price of Bitcoin, currently right around slightly, depending on when you're watching this, it's around $80,000 per coin. It has been going down for the past few weeks, beginning basically in the middle of February. And if we look at the weekly chart for Bitcoin, this is the very first time that we have come down to the 50-week moving average, completely normal, healthy in fact, in a bull market since back in about September of 2024. So this is something that we've been waiting for, an actual cool down, an actual correction. Even in bull markets, yes, we get pullbacks. And in fact, the last time we got a pullback down to this 50-week moving average, that is exactly where the support was. It's just that it took a fair amount of time to get there. It took about 8 months to get down. It was a very sideways, but slightly dumpy. This one was less sideways. It was actually just straight more dumpage, right? By design. By design. That's the point. That's what this administration is trying to do. They're literally telling us that. And yet some people are still like flabbergasted that they are doing what they said they were going to do. I think they're not used to people actually doing what they said they're going to do. So we see Bitcoin actually down about 30% from all-time highs. Again, perfectly in line with a normal bull market correction. In fact, even a 40% correction, down to even the low 70s, even high, maybe mid $60,000 per Bitcoin in a massive wick is still relatively, in fact, not even relatively, it is still normal in a Bitcoin bull market pullback. I'm not saying we're going to get that, but I'm saying even if we did get that, that would not be unprecedented. Ultimately, I think the healthiest thing would be to hold on the weekly this 50-week moving average. Remember a couple of days ago, people were screaming and crying and squealing that the market was dead and there's no way that this pullback would ever recover. And what if it does? Okay. Do you think the people that were saying that, the people that they just want this administration to fail and they want Bitcoin to fail and they want only bad things because then their delusions will be confirmed true. Do you think that if, in fact, we actually, let's say over the next few weeks or something, we end up moving higher and let's say the money printer kicks on and Bitcoin and risk assets just start going higher and we see an explosion in prices similar to what we saw back in 2021, do you think that people are going to say, oh, you were right? No, they're just going to push the goalpost. They're going to not leave comments. Instead of leaving negative ones, they just won't leave them. They won't leave positive ones because they're, again, just emotional traders, emotional investors. People that don't want Bitcoin and stuff like this to do well simply because of their emotions are not people that should be taken seriously. And let's be honest, nobody does take them seriously, right? But it is worth calling out and addressing them because my end goal of doing that is hopefully, even if 0.01% of them end up having their brain signals start firing and the neurons start connecting and they wake up and understand, oh, wow, I was, brainwashed, stuff like that, then it's worth saying it, right? Even if one person watching this video wakes up from me highlighting this, then it's worth saying it. But at this point, nothing bearish whatsoever on the Bitcoin chart. In fact, it looks fantastic compared to especially risk assets like other risk assets like the SPX, for example, or something, right? If we actually look at the SPX, you can see the SPX is below its 50, 100, and 21-day moving averages. If we look at a weekly chart, we can see it's even below its 50-week, whereas Bitcoin is not, okay? This is a pretty large drawdown for the stock market. Again, it is by design. The administration currently is actively they told us and are doing this for a reason. Again, a lot of people still struggle to believe that there's possibly any strategy behind it. But what if there is? Will you change your mind and give credit where it's due? No, of course not, because that would be a rational thing to do, and we don't do that for at least half of the people. They don't do that, so that's big. But personally, I could see the stock market even going lower. We have headwinds ahead of us that are literally manufactured for that reason, but they are doing something behind the scenes that is necessary. Bringing inflation down, forcing the Fed's hand. Okay, that is the bigger picture here. So believe it or not, maybe, just maybe, we are not just going to infinitely prop up this inflation and everything and just pretend like everything's okay like we did the last 4 years. Maybe there's actually, for once, some strategy behind this. As well, with everything, as I've been talking about for months, the DXY, I personally, as I've been saying for a long time, I think it has topped out. We go back to the very beginning of January is where so far we have topped out around 110, currently about 103. I think the DXY has a lot further to fall, which also will further bolster risk assets, Bitcoin, the stock market. I think after this correction, after this dump, whether it becomes a recession or whatever, after this is done, we are going to see the biggest bounce that we've seen in the last 4 years. Okay. If we look at the weekly chart, you can zoom back. The biggest bounce, a bounce similar to like what we saw. We actually have to go back pretty far to this, the biggest since then. Now, I don't necessarily think or plan on a percent drop as big as this. Is about like a 30+% drop. Okay, I'm not necessarily at all saying that is what we need. However, look at this. You need correction sometimes, and if this correction is happening, and it simultaneously is also helping lower inflation, that's literally exactly what we should be desiring, right? There's only a certain minority or a certain group of people that doesn't want to admit that, but that's objectively what would be healthier and better for our economy and the world. People just don't like hearing facts, man. It's crazy. Just like crying and losing it on their emotions. But either way, weekly still looks good. I'm not saying at all that we're definitely bottomed here, right? Clearly, the pressure is still to the downside. If we look at the daily chart, this is the best indication of that. We have to be objective. We look at the weekly chart or the daily chart, reclaiming this 50-week moving average, 21 and 100-day moving averages are the very first step to getting back on a bullish trajectory in the short term. I think that in a couple of months' time, people are going to be very satisfied with where crypto prices are at, but we might have to see more pain first. Currently, this moving average sits at about 88,000 US dollars, which is probably not coincidentally exactly where this other CME gap is, right? Will we get a bounce there over the next couple of days, couple of weeks, potentially? Very likely, in my opinion. As always, the dumpier this gets, the longer it takes, the more healthy, the more pumpy it is likely to be in the future when things actually reverse. Okay, you might not like hearing that now, but in a couple of months' time, if that ends up coming true, you will be very happy that you listened and you planned ahead and that you understood what was actually happening instead of panicking. Okay, sometimes you need to relax. And if you have, actually, I do want to say this. If you have, everyone should be able to voice their opinion, I guess. I mean, it's not whether or not I think people should or not, they will. And I think that's a good thing in some ways. But I think it's important to say, if with crypto specifically, unless you have been in this market for an entire cycle, 4-year period, you have to understand, and this is coming from a place only of trying to be charitable and rationally, objectively, I guess, generous with how people should frame opinions, is that if you have not been through a 4-year cycle, which is a badge that you can earn, you just have to be in a 4-year cycle, right? It's not some unattainable goal. Just be in crypto and understand and look at the markets for 4 years. If you have not been invested for 4 years, keep in mind, your opinion is not very valuable, okay? And that can you can change that. All you have to do is, as I just said, just chill, wait, invest, be in the market for 4 years, go through the psychological patterns, right? Because time and time again, all I see is that the people that do horribly, they underperform, that get banged the most, that end up being emotionally destroyed, those are the people that have not gone through the 4-year cycle yet. And if you haven't, spare everyone else your lack of knowledge and your lack of experience. If you haven't been through a 4-year cycle, I humbly ask, sit down and be quiet, because your opinion is not very important. That might sound arrogant, but it's objectively the truth. If you should need experience for something to be able to talk about it, at the very least, right? If you've been in this market for 6 months, why would you think that you have cracked the code and you know better than anyone else? I'm not saying I can predict this market perfectly, right? I'm not saying that I'm infinitely smarter at Bitcoin than somebody who's been invested for 3 months. Although objectively, I mean, but at the same time, The reason that's important is because not necessarily that I know more about the market, but I understand the emotion and the psychology behind it better because I've experienced it. And many of you watching also have. In fact, I would argue most of the people watching also have experienced many of you probably even more of it than I have in terms of experiencing the psychological and emotional toll of these markets. So I ask you, if you've been in this market for a couple of months, maybe a year, something like that, and you think that for some reason you've cracked the code and you should be panicking right now, and you maybe don't even realize it, but every choice and every statement and every decision you're making is actually driven by pure emotion and erratic lack of understanding of these markets. All I ask is that you put yourself through a 4-year cycle first and then comment, because I guarantee your comments, your experience, your strategy will be vastly different once you actually go through a 4-year cycle for yourself. Not listening to what someone else has said, but actually going through it yourself. And get signed up with Femex or BITUNIX below if you want my Bitcoin altcoins to trade. Without further ado.